Thank you very much. The word making is the global kind of the global notion of the really of the leaders meeting together and so on. And nation building is on the local level. It's actually all the experiences of development of these independent nations, and both notions they interact at some point, and they are in the core of them. There is urban design as this tool that actually helps the leaders to build their nations. So if I have to put it in words, it would be this research poses that word making was not only limited to a political imagination, but was also articulated on the ground in the many housing and infrastructure projects implemented by these independent nations. If we see the literature on urban design in Africa and post-colonial Africa, the most of the research is done by geographers like Akin Mabonnier and also Carlos Nino Silva, for example. These are like overview of urban design in Africa, but still done by in the perspective of geopoliticals. Even if we look back a bit on this canonical, let's say, literature on urban design and architecture in the world, the survey does not include Africa as one of the continents. Also has many of the interesting experiences. But when it talks about Africa, we can only find Africa being always recognized in this frame of architecture, vernacular architecture, which is basically the book of Architecture Without Architect by Rudowski. But also, when it talks about modernism, it's more focused on architecture experiences, mostly by foreign architects in Africa. And here you can see the book of Culturman, Udo Culturman, New Architecture in Africa, published in the 60s. When it talks about the countries in Africa, we have more of the literature basically on the colonial period, but not really on the post-colonial. Many of the research that are done in the post-colonial period, all of them, they focus on the British and German colonies for the simple reason that actually it is more accessible also in terms of language because they speak the same language, and also the archives are much more easier to access. In terms of word making as a notion, it was used for the first time by Nelson Goodman in 1974. And actually, it's always related to political history of it. And the last book on word making, a very interesting book by Adam Getachew, it talks about this Pan-Africanism and these connections between African countries as word making. But once again, here it's really turned into the political actually perspective, and it does not give a view closely to what happens, how word making is emphasized in architecture and urban design. The only book that uses this term of word making in architecture is the book of Lucas Stanek, but once again here he only works on this term in two countries, in Nigeria and Ghana. And actually, he also uses this term as a political socialist countries getting in contact with African countries, which was very clear for Ghana, for example, as a way to get away from the former colonial powers. If I have to, when I did my literature review, I found a very few writings on the cases that I'm actually looking into, especially Morocco and Senegal. Here you can see one of the issues of L'Afrique c'est chic by Waze, and here this journal has kind of a basis of architecture and urban design in Africa in the post-colonial period. And all the research actually being conducted on Morocco and on Senegal on post-colonial architecture are actually still new. There's even not a book until today that talks specifically on Morocco and Senegal. But there are some research done by other fellow doctoral students, especially in Belgium. So here is a map of the archives where it is situated. Here you can see with the dots where you can see with the black, of course, Morocco, and then you see Senegal in Africa, and then you see these dots. These dots are actually where the archive is situated. And here you can see how much these archives are used. in terms of when we talk about colonial and post-colonial architecture and urban design in the literature. And of course, you can see that the dots are really big in Europe because most of the archives extracted that talks about Africa in general, they come from Europe in general, from former colonies. But my attempt in my research is really to look into a different source and different archives. And that's why I'm calling it silent archives. So my idea is to give a voice to those silent archives. That's why my research is not intended actually to just forget about the European archives, but actually it was to implement, to give another narrative and to give another story and to make also this balance between the archives. So all of the archives that you're going to see in my second section of the presentation is going to be archives that actually from Morocco, that I took from Morocco, and no archives actually are coming from abroad. This is not like exclusive or whatever, but it's more of this is my state of research now. So I started with local archives, and I'm going, of course, to other archives in Paris or even in MIT, because there they have like a big collection of some of the works in the post-colonial Morocco. So here, I'm gonna emphasize now how word making is actually put on the ground. So you can see here a map of Morocco. You can see the pink part is actually the French former colony. And you can see the dot, the red dot is actually this connection between what is white here in the map is the Spanish part. So Morocco, as you might know, was colonized by two countries, French and Spain. So French is the pink part and Spain, the north and the south of Morocco. And the dot there is actually the a road that was completely shut down between both boundaries. And the first ever project by this new nation of Morocco was actually to build a road that is connecting the two borders. That actually we are trying now to get more of an idea about Morocco as a united country. So they called it the Road of Unity. So it's a project of a road that connects the former French colony and the Spanish colony, and it's actually a project of 60 kilometers of length. And here you can see that the project was inaugurated by the king himself. That's also like an image of the builder of the country. But what is more interesting is the unique experience that emphasized the need of citizens in the word making project of Morocco. So here, Mehdi Ben Barka, sorry, who was actually one of the nationalists, he was the mastermind behind the project, and he explained in conference that the road of unity is not a simple road. By this new way, traced by the hand of the young people, will pass irresistibly those whose only ambition, how much noble, is to be the true builders of the independence. The use of the word "the builders of independence" is very important here, and I'm gonna put it more in detail. So he says we are now in the presence of a considerable potential of the service of the nation. The volunteerism of the youth is not ever. It is not over. It is getting started. This institution will be the rural township. The builders will have to be the most enthusiastic leaders of it, since it will constitute the basic cell that will promote the social, economic, and cultural revolution in the whole country. Here, what is interesting of Mehdi Ben Bakr's speech is the fact that this road was not built by the government or built by the soldiers themselves only. It was also built by volunteers. And here you can see a map of Morocco where they gathered more than 10,500 volunteers came in from different 15 cities in Morocco and really wanted to achieve this building mission, let's say. And here you can see in this newspaper that was published daily when the project was going, which is actually a project of only 3 months. Here you can see in the title, it's written in Arabic, "Idrib hatta ya'ti mustahil," which means hit until you achieve the impossible. So this mission, this image of hit until you achieve the impossible, it's really something that is very important in the mind of these young young nation that wanted to build itself. And so it was very important that the whole mission about independence is not just the fact that we are independent, but the whole important mission is actually to rebuild or to continue building our country. And here is an attestation, once again, a kind of a diploma or certificate that was given to the people, to the volunteers. And in this, also you can find one big title that is called Mobilization to Build the Independence. And this is exactly what I was trying to emphasize. So how this project that was only 4 months after independence of Morocco was very relevant, it was relevant because all of the project that will come furthermore in Morocco will always take in as a reference this huge project of the Road of Unity or the Road to Unity. Here you can see a presentation of the project Village Pilote La Bellevue in Khmissat, which is really a small city in Morocco. What is interesting is this image that shows, for example, Michel Ecochard as the former urbanist in the colonial period, showing this project of Agadir to generals and showing it to military people. And here, after independence, the difference shift of it is actually you have the urban designer in the center who is local, who is Moroccan, and you have the people themselves looking at the model and looking at the project. So that's a very, very important shift of even the mission of construction, how how it's more of a participatory, it's more of like speaking the same language, and the other it was more as a colonialist urban design policy. And here once again you can see this picture of officials trying to hit until they achieve the impossible. This image comes back again, and of course the housing was completed in a way, and it was completed in this idea of really achieving, let's say, the impossible. So to understand all of these projects, the connection to all of these projects is one big agency in Morocco. And this big agency is called Service de l'Urbanisme, the Service of Urbanism, or the Department of Urbanism. So here you can see, I just wanted to share with you a bit of historical, how it was, how it went from a colonialist agency to an independent agency. So here Michel Ecochard was the founder, from 1946 to 1953. And then Abdeslam Farawi took over to be the lead of the service after independence in 1956. So he was the director between 1957 and 1960. And then afterwards, Mourad Ben Mbarak, also the second Moroccan architect to direct the series Amazing from 1960 to 65, and lastly, in my trajectory of the time, is Mohammed Bel Khadir, who was the director from 1965 to 1970. So here is the first biggest, let's say, housing project implemented in the colonial period by Ecochard. Here you can see Carrière Centrale in Hay Mohammadi. It was basically housing for to solve the problem of the slums. So this was the first big project for the locals, because before that, as Michel Ecochard says it, when he came to Morocco in 1946, he says, we actually been here for 35 years already, but we forgot about the locals. And for him, the whole mission was actually to build more and more housing for the locals. After independence, his same grid that he called the grid of 8 per 8 meter, it started really getting more and more famous all over Morocco, even after independence. So here you can see also that not all of the urban planning was completely rejected. It was actually embraced, and it was transformed with the time after independence. What is very important also to say is that the colonialist kind of thought about urban design was always present even before independence. Here is a letter in 1954 where actually the real estate company, a Franco-Moroccan real estate company, they urged the government at the time that actually they wanted to expand Sidi El Bernousi, the picture that I just saw you, that I just actually show you, and they wanted to expand it more and to build more and more housing. For them, it was very important act to show that actually they care for the people of Bernousi. But this let's say this argument was not sufficient for the colonial government, as they answered them, that saying we cannot expand because we thought of a gap between the neighborhoods, and this gap should stay actually empty, because for safety reasons it is absolutely essential to preserve that area. So here it shows how the urban planning, the colonial urban planning, was actually to control many areas. Even in Barnossi, when they were building for the locals, they were still trying to control in a way the district, but not completely connected. So that's exactly the, let's say, the colonial shift that was before and after independence. Independence of Morocco acted and signature in France, in Paris. And here you can see Mbarak el-Bekai with Christian Pinault signing the independence of Morocco in March 2nd, 1956. And what is very important at the time is that now we will have still, I mean, only 4 days after this signature, like in 6th March, only 4 days, there is a letter coming from France to Casablanca, where it says there is a new architect just hired by Service de l'Urbanisme who is coming to work as a mission for him in Morocco. So this is like very interesting to see, because it was not as clear and as sharp, the independence, and then there is no longer French architects coming. So here, even after independence, after signing an official document, French architect is still coming to Morocco to work. And that shows how complex is this transition from the colonial to the post-colonial period. And here in this letter, it shows this. So what is this shift? I mean, what is the important, let's say, transition to independence? This transition, Murad bin Mubarak, he actually in a seminar in Ifran in 1962, he defines what is urban design. So for him, urban design is housing, work, circulation, and leisure, which of course connect very much to Shahdaten, for example. But also what is important is also the way of doing urban design, which is based on the social, economic, demographic conditions that you have to study, the percentages of the problems, but also the approval of plans and also laws. What is important also is that Murad bin Barak was very aware of the problems of the urban design after independence, which mostly is the natural extension of urban centers. So you have to do more extension of urban perimeter. You have to remodel all districts. You have to do the balance between population densities, and also you have to tackle the huge problem of the slums. How this was really on the ground, here you can see a picture of the government, the first government of Morocco in 1956. And this figure here, Mohammed Diouri, was actually the minister of public works. And he was a minister only at the age of 28 years old. So here it shows how young were those leaders coming from education, from basically all basic. I mean, the main parts of them were formed in France, but then came back to Morocco after independence, and they were already ministers and people who took in hand many of the public organizations. And here once again, I found this letter signed by Mohammed Diouri, where actually the governor of Casablanca, he says to him that we need to build more of the housing in the in the west part of Casablanca, but the west part of Casablanca was already a rich part. So Mohammed Diouri is arguing with him, saying that actually now we need to construct more in the east part, because the east part is the much more poor part, and people need more of housing there. So that's why my people, I mean my experts, they are working more and more in Sidi Barnossi in the east than in the west. And this shows, if it only shows something, for me, that's a big statement of saying that those young leaders, young Moroccan leaders that I called also silent while word makers, they were aware of this balance, as Murad Mubarak, the balance of densities and also the balance of the housing in Morocco. And they were not just bluntly designing everywhere in Casablanca. This is what they've been talking about, Sidi Barnosi. This is a photo from already from late 50s, and you can see here the housing, as I showed you already in Hay Mohammadi, the famous grid of Ecole. But what is interesting is also in only 14 years after Mohammed Diori announced that he will be focused in Barnosi, this scheme of ground floor houses is not actually working anymore. And here you can see a letter which says, a letter from the governor of Casablanca that actually says, I have the honor to inform you that following the instruction received from the Department of Urban Planning, the regional delegation of Casablanca is currently undertaking a study aimed at densifying most of the old housing estates of the habitat. It seems indeed that the plans of these housing estates were designed at a time when the land was not expensive to have provided large open spaces. So he really argued that this type of housing was interesting, but now we have other challenges. We have more and more need for housing. So I am authorizing this house to go from this to this. And that's how the houses that are actually in ground floor, they are now tolerated to go more into height. And this is exactly what happened right after the authorization, even before the authorization, because this authorization was already in 1970s, but those houses were already being promoted, let's say, by the people themselves already after independence. So I want to finish with this image. So this image, it shows you the actual situation of these projects. And what you see here in red is actually the water tower. This is also to give you a kind of situation. So that's the water tower, and this is how today it's the whole project. So it's a very, very dense neighborhood. It is by far the densest, the more dense neighborhood in the whole Casablanca. And Casablanca, by the way, is a 5 to 6 million people city, and this is the whole neighborhood. Where actually, I think this speaks to Christoph as well, because our school, the School of Architecture in Casablanca, is actually in this neighborhood. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Labib. I've been taking lots of notes, and I think there will be lots of questions as well from everybody. If you're okay, we could move over to Marco and then have a conversation jointly.
For
But I
sure.
think there are joint themes. I very much like this term of the silent world maker, and I think some of those terms might actually also bridge across. So if that's okay with everybody, I would like to hand over to you, Marco.
Yes. Thanks, Labib. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay.
We can see it now perfectly.
Yes. Is it now full screen?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So, as you might have read, my research is titled Curating Urban Future, Urban Farming and Meanwhile Tactics in the Context of Urban Regeneration Strategy. And I'm working in collaboration with CREA Madrid Nuevo Norte, which is an organization that's doing development in Madrid, currently the largest development in Europe, that is interestingly using participation to develop their master plan. So to start, many of you living in London will be familiar with these projects, or at least with this aesthetics that is increasingly populating London and around. These projects range from food markets with spaces of encounters, clothes markets with exhibition spaces, but also include small boutique shop for small businesses, which often are joined with recreational spaces, and also co-working spaces, maker spaces, which also allow for flexible and adaptable spaces for events and so on. A growing number of architecture practices, as you can see from the curation and from the material and the design that has been used, a growing number of architecture practice charities and organizations and institutions have been experimenting in the UK in the past 10 years with participatory model of urban regeneration. These projects appear within underused sites, car park structure, and they're often near regeneration projects. In the UK, this is what it's been called Meanwhile, a term that was introduced in 2009 in occasion of the Department for Communities local government project called Meanwhile Project. It describes the project. It described the process of interim occupation of vacant premises during periods of redevelopment, and it's been kept until the landlord secure tenancy agreement or a lease. This has been called after the name Meanwhile was called after one of the first organizations that was professionally managing spaces on an interim basis, Meanwhile Space. As you can see, they've been operating since 2019 and converting a big amount of space into spaces that have been used by the community, that have been serving local communities with often with infrastructure and spaces that were often lacking. In more than a decade, this practice has been growing, and both in interest, number, and quality of the project. These are projects that are backed by municipal funds. They're managed by expert operators, and they're enabled by teams of practitioners that often work pro bono or with lower rates that one would actually expect. And they're oriented or said to be oriented towards the inclusion of local communities through participation and a focused agenda. What's been surveyed in 2018, actually, 51 sites were surveyed in central by the center of London, and they were covering an area of more than 200,000 square meters, which is, if you think in number, is 2.5 times the floor space of Selfridges. As you've seen, the difference in size and scope, and landowners and boroughs are increasingly providing spaces for meanwhile use. So Centre for London clarifies that what differentiates meanwhile use from temporary use is the land availability, the relationship between land availability and duration, and also the operational model, obviously, as I explained, underpinning their existence. So while temporary use are often, always short-term, experimental, and exist within permanent sites, meanwhile use can be, yes, short-term, but can also extend into longer-term with longer leases. And it's meant to be tactical in nature. So it's a tactic that has, but it appears within a planned strategy of change. Through the years, the Greater London Authority has been increasingly interested in understanding and demystifying this practice, and many research has been funded and in order to understand the potential of this practice, in order to understand how this can sustain an inclusive growth of London while major redevelopment goes on. As we all know, land values increases substantially in cities like London or Madrid, and the pressure over the development uses is very high, but also the regeneration projects, as we've seen, like in Cross or the Madrid Nuevo Norte, which is the project I'm also working on, are very big and complex and phased over a long interval of time. So we're talking about 10 years, we're talking about 20 years to be developed. So this growing number of meanwhile use could be an advantage and opportunities for landowner and developer, but also for community. In fact, reports and interviews clarify that the appearance of minimal use is also symptomatic of a growing skepticism towards development practices and planning itself, for the inability to kind of deliver the kind of spaces and places that a locality needs. Developer and landowner as well are aware that offering land and funding, like small amount of funding, I mean, compared to the earning, in return for an early activation of the site, can be very profitable to establish as well a sense of public realm early in time, and provide social, economic, and environmental benefit. If we think in number, I mean, this could sound, and it sounds very challenging, but there are also quite big opportunities if we think in number. If you think that 1% of the land with planning permission will be developed in the next 10 years, which amounts to 2,700 hectares of land, which is as big as the borough of Lambeth, and think about one medium-sized minimal use could range from 0.5 to 5 hectares. Let's forget that all sites are suitable. So you think that half of them giving away 10 or 60% of their space. This amount to 400 hectares in Greater London and 66 hectares in Central London, which is 3 times Green Park. So when you think of this opportunity and you look at, I mean, my research actually concentrates and focuses on a certain type of meanwhile use, which without any agreed operational framework and expectation on their application, these kind of projects has established the framework of participatory practice around urban farming, food growing, and ecological and landscaping project, which I believe has had an interesting rippling effect. Well before the term meanwhile use was popularized in 1975, James McCullough, a sculptor and a resident of North Paddington, was just bothered about the condition and the lack of institutional response to the urban dereliction of the neighborhood, and he started the Meanwhile Garden Association together with few residents. And after obtaining the lease from the council without funding, they started working the land and transforming it into a garden. With time, passers-by got involved in the project, at the beginning bothered by the fact that the council wouldn't provide help and support, but suddenly started seeing it as an opportunity to have a garden and to have something to care about. And this in years became what today is one of the most beloved and sought after green spaces of the neighborhood, which runs volunteering sessions, which has recreational activities, and which hosts festival parties, and which has grown, and as you can see from the photos, substantially, and contributed substantially to the regreening of the neighborhood. Although today the looming plans of redevelopment are basically putting in danger the space, the community has been securing successfully and continuously the lease of the land. More close to what we know as meanwhile use is a project started by Global Generation in 2009. Global Generation is an educational charity concerned with connecting communities and working jointly to tackle environmental issues. Has been approached by King Cross Development Partnership while they were redeveloping the land, and asked them to create a temporary garden within the construction sites. Now, the idea of building garden and growing food within skips might seem naive, but has proved to be quite successful, and basically helped, not helped, but kind of provided to be kind of very inspirational for young kids and parents of the area, where the Somerstown Community Association, for example, was in need of spaces that were secure, safe, and where the kids could learn about nature and meet between each other. Now the garden moved several times across the site while the construction were proceeding, and the site also became an occasion for learning, where young Catane architects, which was also teaching at the Bartlett, used it as a testing ground with the students to build structures that could make the garden more functional. So as well as Central St. Martin with the MAKE program have had an on-site kind of facility where the students could work and contribute to the maintenance of the garden. The garden has moved, as I said, several times, and today is on a site near to the British Library on a 3-year lease. And Global Generation kind of exemplify, I mean, the approach to Global Generation, which is today also working in Canada Water. In Canada Water also is undergoing an urban regeneration in collaboration with British Land and Southwell Council, and actually managed to obtain a permanent lease on that site. Their approach exemplify the way in which meanwhile use can evolve without being too tight to a place, but can be an opportunity to grow confidence, know-how, to liaise with landowner and developer and local authorities to obtain funding, but also to put on the ground project that can have a positive impact both in terms of social aspect and environmental aspects. Another interesting project that I will show you is the Waterloo City Farm. The Waterloo City Farm, which started in 2014, where the Guy's and St. Thomas Hospital approached Oasis, which is a charity which runs several schools around the area, and gave them a site. Oasis wouldn't know what to do with the site and approaches Jamie's Farm, which is a national charity which integrates children to farming, which happened to know Fairden Falls architect, who offered the architectural services in exchange of free rent of the site. So with only £150,000 on a very difficult site to be developed, the farm actually hosts the offices and the educational space for the schools surrounding. As you can see, the structure is all modular and it's ready to be disassembled and reassembled somewhere else. Another approach, another type of project which is quite interesting is the Loughborough Junction, which was initiated by the Loughborough Junction Action Group, which is a charity that fights for better and healthier environment. Since 2014 has been colonizing a patchwork of spaces across a difficult junction, with a main site for food production, but also a cafe, a playground, and spaces for recreational spaces. This was done in collaboration with Public Practice, which is a non-profit design practice. And with time and with growing expertise and bidding, they managed to secure a lease of 20 years, which by all means is almost like a proper development project because there is no plan to redevelop the land afterwards. The bid was successful and they earned at £1.3 million. And as you can see on the right-hand side, this has allowed the construction of community kitchen and more proper spaces for education. These are managed by Meanwhile CIC, which is another operator of Meanwhile, which is going to manage it for the first 8 to 10 years while training the local community to actually self-maintain it. Now, there are many other examples, but I think these could be somehow exemplifying how these initiatives can kind of hold what I think are two main promises. One is the contribution they make to the urgent ecological transition of our city and the sustainable food system, triggered by socio-political concepts such as food sovereignty, food security, and agroecology. Temporary solution has been used in the past as solution to urban decline. If you think about 1990s Detroit, or think about the survival tactics against famine during the war, like the Victory Garden programs. And this reverberates today in the work of charity and smaller independent actors and municipal program in London, not only in London, but in Europe as well. Like Incredible Edible in Todmorden, but also think about the Capital Grow, which is a network that supports such initiative in the UK. This also has the contribution these projects make has also kind of is also reflected in the academic and professional debate, which is landscape as urbanism, where the complexity of ecological systems, their autonomy and self-organizing principle can update tools and methods for urbanism. On the other hand, the promise is that they can also reframe participatory processes within urban development. It has been said that restructuring society and food system go hand in hand, and there is a strong link between autonomy of this project and the radical social movement that initiate. And these kind of represent at best what the paradigm shift should be. And also they kind of show the possibility of restoring a cooperative culture, in a way acting immediately with contingent needs to respond to deep-seated problem. It's kind of key without losing and maintaining a strategic vision. So in a way, this proves how space and time are quite instrumental, and even the smallest project can introduce positive loop within urban transformation for a transition that we know it's gradual but require immediate action. Now, we are aware since 2011 that our food system is on the verge of collapse. It's collapsing due to the damages brought about by the Green Revolution, where monoculture and with pesticide has been putting our soils and to the verge of collapse. And the Food and Organization Program suggested a shift to a more fragmented and regenerative practice of agriculture could repair the damage brought about by the Green Revolution. When we ask about the contribution of meanwhile use in that sense, this has been recognized as responding to key point in the resilience strategy in London, but also how it can influence the policies in the London plan, and for its potential to the intensification of green infrastructure. Europe and the UK are gearing up with green infrastructure strategies and seeing the landscape as a network that must be planned, designed, and managed in an integrated way. And within these policies, within food growing policies, borrowers are encouraged to include and consider new development, meanwhile use and vacant use for food growing, community garden and allotment sites. So in a sense, an understanding, this puts us in a situation where we kind of start to understand how, if we want to move out from like a monocultural, from a kind of one way, linear way of thinking of the way we develop our land, to an understanding of the city and society as something that is more close to an ecosystem that is a complex one. If we do that, that holds the promise to define new incremental way and find new paths to resilience, where even the smallest project can introduce positive loops, mitigating the risk of food scarcity, supporting a healthier nutrition, but also bring about social benefits and also economic benefits. Robert Beale, which is an expert in political economy, sustainable development, and urban farming, has argued, as I said, that restructuring society and food system go hand in hand, and the definition of organic has suggested a connection between the natural, so without pesticide and based on ancient knowledge, and that of the self-organizing principle of complex systems. So working against a system that is highly linear and simplified. The promise is that this, as I said, these practices, the actors involved in the meanwhile use rely on networks that include artists, curators, spatial practitioners. So arts is increasingly relying more on the production of experiences rather than objects to exhibit in galleries. And this can offer also valuable ways and valuable insights into participatory methods. A way to understand what Claire Bishop calls the social dimension of participation, which has an heritage and which is starting from the situationist in the 60s to relational art in the 90s. We can learn from these practices ways in which activation of the subject and distribution of authorship and community through collective elaboration of meaning can bring about new ways, can refresh tools and methods for participation. These have been also the premises of a shift in the way of practicing architecture and its role in establishing collective policies, actions, and values grounded on the ideas of self-determination, care, togetherness, sharing, and making the public. An architecture that starts from the local but aim at blurring the boundary between the local and the global, and that relies on different means, often different means than brick and mortar, and includes curation, pedagogy, art networks, but also don't exclude building. In many ways, these ideas also link with the Marxist and theorist anarchist, theorist Akin Bey, expressed in the temporary autonomous zone, where he argues that peak experiences can have a profound meaning in affecting the subject, in that they interrupt an otherwise monotonous and monorhythmic life. So an experience that is temporarily bounded can open up fresh perspective in the participant and open up new alternatives, ways of living. So where an uprising must be preferred to a revolution, because a revolution only leads to another rigid form of governance, the uprising can open up to new perspective. So, I mean, Bey radically praises impermanence as the seedbed for novelty and change, as the very essence of urban life, which can change through fleeting and temporary experiences. And to me, that is interesting because it opened up, I mean, when you question if these projects that are temporary, if these projects, the fact that they're temporary can hinder the opportunity for the long-term impact, what emerged, as I explained, is that they all last considerably long time, like 20 years. It's a long time. So these raises more philosophical questions to what actually temporary is in urban design, urban and planning. So as Bishop argues, which is an interesting way of seeing it, the temporary is something that is intentionally bounded in time, and it's helpful to think that in the long term, everything is temporary. Everything ends in the long term. And in this way, if we see the infrastructure as something permanent, at this point, the temporary use becomes a very interesting tool to test and to challenge the orthodoxy with which we use our infrastructure. So losing the faith in the myth of permanence can open up new ways of thinking, can open up new ways in which we use our infrastructure. And in this way, I think looking at the project that we've seen as well, the dialectic between tactical urbanism, tactical project, and systemic change start to blur, because we understand how these impact in the long term, what the permanent is. So this is quite evident in the context of urban regeneration strategy and master plan, where interim uses have been deliberately strategic and can lead to something that is being called by Arabs transitional urbanism, so a collective activation strategy towards a common goal. So the possibility of testing approaches, understanding local needs, encourage action of the local community, and overcoming some of the difficulties that consultation has by making tangible and by allowing more by working on more relatable immediate issues that a locality finds itself in. So it's true that reports value their efficiency, affordability, and flexibility. But this kind of, we've been, many authors and researchers warn us not to fall into the seduction of temporary urbanism, because if we put forward these projects often rely on a narrative that is based on growth, on no time to waste, and that so hurry up, like bring back life to the site as soon as you can, because the opportunities are not these opportunities are not going to be forever. It's a narrative that doesn't understand that the temporary is an increasingly permanent trend. Also, case studies suggest that the value in which this the value that these initiatives are grounded on, that of independence, care, togetherness, sharing, and making the public, are values that are inspired by a narrative that has less expectation on immediate change, but actually relies on the present, on the now, and on the openness of what the participants bring about to kind of change what the future of the users will be. So in a way, it seems promising to think that temporary uses could actually impact the way in which the future of a place will look like. But the idea of living spontaneity, like spontaneous order, as being the optimal solution is again one of the neoliberal mantra. So in a way, authors like Neil Brenner argue, how is it possible that technical urbanism could ever oppose neoliberal urbanism? And the answer relies, at least the author claimed that the answer relies in what we call institutional redesign. So in a way, tactical urbanism and neoliberal urbanism share the same mistrust in the institution. So without a redesign of the institution, it's not really possible to bring about the change. So by institutional redesign, he means the system of rules that govern the production, the use, and the occupation of space. So rethinking these rules seem promising, but what we know is that we also need spaces to rethink this rule, which Peter Bishop calls zones of transitions. So zones of transitions is an interesting concept. When you look at on the ground where this project happened, you may notice that they often occupy very difficult sites to be commercially developed. They are often close to major infrastructure and often in connection with existing green infrastructure. I think this, in the line of argument that I've been presenting to you, offer a big potential for future development. Even when you think that regeneration projects are increasingly remodeling existing infrastructure and optimizing the use, like in King's Cross or like Madrid Nuevo Norte, which is the project I am working. I am actually looking at closely right now in Madrid. As you see, the project occupies remodels. I mean, the project it's actually occupying an underused rail track and regenerating the main station. Has big connections with the airport. It has a connection with the international airport. The project is based on, the approach to the project consider the development of a green infrastructure that connects existing green spaces, but also the transformation of the station with the park, covering the rail track and transforming the station with the park that would cover the rail track. So the project is very ambitious in size and scope. As you can see, it has the dimension of a city, and the risk, the massive risk, the B-side, and the long time for development has put the project under constant review. Actually, the project has been conceived in 1993 and was only approved in 2019 due to the political instability and the financial crisis, and for the public debate surrounding its numbers. Even more when you consider that the spaces around the development, the neighborhoods around the development, present a massive amount of empty space that hasn't been completed due to the crisis, and oversized infrastructure, and neighborhoods that have very little possibility to thrive due to the separation of this massive infrastructure cutting the city in two. So I think the potential for strategies for landscaping transition is quite high on this territory. And DCN, the developer, through the Área de Compromiso Social, which is the link between the developer and the citizen, has been working since 2016 and has proved to be instrumental for the approval of the project. They've been opening up offices around the surrounding neighborhood. They've been first on the west, then on the east of the neighborhood, creating online platform, hosting consultation, information session. So they've been increasingly being present in what were the surrounding neighborhood, increasingly making the citizen aware of what the project was, and demystifying the fact that they would destroy the character of what existed, but they would only make things better in a way. Obviously, projects like this are always seen as controversial, but the work they've been doing so far has demonstrated that the citizen have been the approval for the project was actually pushed by the citizen, pushed by the neighborhood surrounding the development, which were asking the mayor to approve the project, which was actually in the end approved in 2019. So this is quite a different situation from what happens in London, where like participation is often participation and meanwhile projects are often used while the project is already ongoing. In this case, the project, the participatory processes behind it helped to get the project approved. So I think this is already something that makes this project quite special and unique and different from what happens in London. Through times, the area of social engagement has knitted a network of development that is quite impressive, more than 200 collective between neighborhood association, communities, schools, NGO, foundations, universities, and they've been consulting, they've been advising and translating the information that they would get from these sessions to inform the technical office and to update and change the master plan and its public spaces. Now the organization is in a new phase where they're organizing more tangible projects, some of which have an impact on the design, on the brief that would be put forward for competitions for the development of the plot, but they're also organizing walks to kind of reconnect, to kind of create awareness around the potential, around the biodiversity, around the communities that make the surrounding. So their ideas, their scope is that of becoming a channel of communication, and they're successfully managing stakeholders to get projects on the ground. One of the new in the new phase in the calendar, one of the initiatives that will be part of the future of these sites, which are going to be developed in the next 20-25 years, is that of using land for meanwhile use, what they call espacios de transición, using tactical urbanism. And in that sense, my research seeks to kind of feed and seeks to also gain from their work and the way they have been managing participation, and they've been managing such a vast amount of people participating to these projects. So to do so, I mean, as you might have, I mean, to kind of the subject matter of this practice-based research points towards somehow transdisciplinary way of practicing architecture, both in the knowledge held by the research I'm doing and the methods that I'm trying to understand and trying to develop. I mean, I'm questioning ways in which as architects one can embrace a much more curatorial approach in a way that in practicing urban design, so to facilitate inclusive approaches to urbanism. In practice, I'm seeking to develop tools to do that, to be able to advise, to be able to learn from this process, and ways in which we can operate in this at the intersection of these disciplines. So to do that, I was Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention that actually, yes. So within this Madrid, like, sorry, I forgot that I was, yeah. So within, what's interesting to me is that basically the potential to use these spaces for tactical urbanism relies on the fact that at the municipal level, Madrid is part of C40 Cities, which is an organization organization of mayors that are proactively doing work for the ecological gain of the cities. And one of the initiatives is called Madrid Isla de Calor, which is a proposal to intensify the green infrastructure through different projects, two of which are very interesting and related to my research. One of them is the Bosque Metropolitano, which is a project of development of green spaces across Madrid, which will see the intensification of the green infrastructure around the city. And another one is the Barrio Productores, which points toward more a micro-scale approach. So a project that has an environmental impact, but also socio-economical impact through basically making an existing network of urban farming, which has been initiated since 2015 around Madrid, to making them productive and economically profitable in the future. So in a way, we see how from a strategical and municipal level, initiative like this could be well integrated within tactical project that a developer like Madrid Nuevo Norte is trying to do. So in order to develop tools and methods, I've been trying to test ways in which collaboration and participation could be brought about. And my first pilot project was at the summer school, was in occasion of the summer school at the Architecture Association, which I called the Octopus Garden. The Octopus Garden is quite a metaphor. The metaphor is that octopuses collect objects on the seabed of the ocean to kind of create garden. So in a way, it's kind of a metaphor to kind of challenge the students to rethink the way in which they way they inhabit the environment, and ways in which we could find tactics to be less invasive and intrusive. So the project for the project, I involved a range of practitioners and expert. Carol, an expert in urban garden, and she's an expert in urban gardens and a beekeeper, and opened many urban gardens in South London. Michael Smythe of phytology, Valerio Chacha of BOF as a curator, Aude Diomene from Bartlett Casa, expert in urban farming. She worked 2 years in vertical farms. Andrea Veneri from Edison Studio, which has worked with performances and music. Javi, structural engineer, and Milo, community designer. Together, over 3 weeks, with 14 students coming from 10 different nationalities, we have been increasingly exploring London. We've been exploring first London urban landscape, learning about medicinal plants and plants and the richness of what surrounds us and the richness of urban nature, and then increasingly thinking in ways in which we could grow food with simple means, learning about soils and seeds, planting mushrooms. We've been testing the ways in which acting now immediately can bring about ideas of community sharing and knowing each other, as the students didn't know each other before. This has also been instrumental to think ways in which we can do with less and do collaborative seeding authorship, and trying to see ways in which and testing quick ways, as time was very limited, testing ways in which design can help us to get to know each other. The students immediately became very close to each other, and we're still in contact somehow, which proved to be quite interesting and amazing. To close and open to the public what the students produced, we organized a performance. And we transformed all that populated the garden into musical instruments, which were then activated by the people participating to the party. And a closing performance was organized by the students who performed in front of the audience, and which basically marked the closure of the garden. Now, I want to close my presentation by opening up to question, as I'm questioning ways in which this research, which goes in a different direction, and how these tools and methods that I'm trying to develop in practice and through the pilot project can also contribute to informing and to testing new ideas on what is the future development in Madrid, and how this can also become something that can be translated and into more transversal network of stakeholder and practices across Europe and the UK. So thank you.